Good evening. The Annapolis City Council's Public Safety Standing Committee meeting is now called to order. It is 6:05 p.m. on Monday, May 7th, 2018. We'll now have roll call. Alderman Fred Payon.
Here.
Alderwoman Shanika Henson.
Not here.
Alderwoman Rhonda Pendell Charles, here. Business before this committee. A, approval of the minutes. PSC 040218, approval of the minutes for the regular meeting. At this time, I would entertain a motion that we approve the minutes from our last committee meeting.
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. So approved. We're going to move the agenda around just a bit. We have 4 things on the agenda this evening. We'll go with ID 14618, presentation, welcome and introductions, role as city manager, and financial and budget matters from our new city manager, Ms. Teresa Owens Sutherland. Welcome, Ms. Sutherland.
Thank you. So thank you for having me. This is my first Public Safety Committee meeting. I'm sure I'll be in attendance at others, and if not, I'll be recording them and watching them at home because I have nothing better to do. So I am the new city manager. I've been here for 2 weeks and 3 or 4 days. We've got the budget before us. We've got union negotiations before us and a multitude of other issues to deal with. It's been a bit overwhelming. But since we are in the heat of budget season, I want to thank Pam Brown, right? It's Brown, for coming. And she's going to talk to you about some grant funding. I think to the extent that we can leverage the more we can leverage our grants, the better. And particularly to the extent that they're ongoing grants, if they're pertaining to personnel and things like that. I understand that there's a grant that the Local Management Board, Partnership for Families, Youth, and Children, did I get that in the right order? Youth, Families, and Children. Youth, Children, and Families. Damn. Darn it. Yeah. Has received from the federal government, it's about $750,000, and it's to be used to assist the youth in the city of Annapolis, not outside the city, but within the city limits. So we're really grateful to have the opportunity to be able to have you all use some of that federal money to assist us. There is, my understanding, a group that has our chief of police, one of the assistants in the mayor's office, the county executive's representative, representative from AACPS, the state's attorney's office, a multitude of people who will develop a strategic plan for the use of that money, which will then go to the federal government for approval of that plan. So we are grateful to have 2 seats on that committee. I would simply ask that as you move forward with that, that you would consider, there are 2 co-chairs, that you would consider adding a 3rd co-chair that would be one of the representatives from the city government, so that we do have representation on the committee. But certainly, I think it would be appropriate to have one of the co-chairs be one of the city employees, since this is a grant that will benefit the youth of our city. So I'd ask you all to consider that. To the extent anybody else knows any grants, I understand you're the grant master, Kevin. Yeah, yeah. So, to the extent we can get those grants, let's get them. So anyway, thank you so much for the opportunity to introduce myself to you all.
Thank you, Ms. Sutherland. Alderman Payon, do you have any questions?
No.
Thank you so much for appearing before our committee today, and yes, we will be calling you back as time moves on.
All right, I'm going to go crunch some numbers.
All right, sounds good. Next item on the agenda, I'm going to move it around a little bit since Dr. Brown is our guest, and we let our guests go first before our rank and file. The next item on the agenda will be item number ID 14518, presentation, the Annapolis Collaborative for Change Grant, Safe and Thriving Communities, Office of Juvenile Justice, Delinquency Prevention, History of the Grant, Background Report, Update Cities Roles, Next Step by Dr. Pam M. Brown, who's our Executive Director, Anne Arundel County Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families. Welcome, Dr. Brown. Do you have a microphone in front of you? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Am I on? I'm on now, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm on. So, oh gosh, about a year and a half ago, a group of us got together in response to some of the violence that had been happening in the city, and really just to talk to one another about what was going on. And I know Chief Simmons was there, and Chief Baker was there, and many other folk at that time. And we decided we would apply, or the partnership decided we would apply for a federal grant. And I want to tell you that at the time, our finance people said, no, do not apply for an OJJDP grant because they will torment the life out of you. So we applied, and I was amazed that we actually got the grant because it was a national call out for applications all around youth gun violence, all around the country. Very, very competitive. This is the second round, so there's already a group of 5 cohorts who are part of what they call safe and thriving communities. I'm sorry, I'm trying to talk to everybody. I feel like I've got my back to Rhonda. So basically, the first cohort is made up of 5 cities, one of which is Chicago. I think New York's in there. So even as I was applying for this grant, I was thinking they're not going to look at little old Annapolis and think that we're worthy of consideration for, and we thought the grant was $350,000. We applied, we got the call from the feds, you're in the second round of cohorts, you're one of 5. City of Annapolis is now one of 5 nationally, so Virginia is in there, and 3 others that I can never remember. And when they sent us the letter of award, it was not $350,000, which is what we'd applied for. It was, in fact, $750,000. And so they made it very clear that it was not a grant. It was what they like to call a cooperative agreement, which it seems to me means that they are basically, they walk with you through everything that you do. We are now in the first year. We have calls with the federal government every week.
Excuse me, Dr. Brown?
Yes.
Could I ask you to face this way? I'm having trouble.
Sorry. I'm sort of, I know. I'm with you.
The acoustics are terrible in
I know.
here.
So we basically have to work with the feds on a weekly basis. We have to explain to them what we're doing. We have to get lots and lots of technical assistance from them because they insist that we are now in a planning period and they don't want us to do anything but plan. And so the first part of that planning is what they call a community assessment, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. So we'll move along here. Before I do that, let me just say a quick word about what the partnership does. My agency is the Partnership for Children, Youth and Families. We are the local management board for the county. We basically perform the needs assessment. If you've heard about Poverty Amidst Plenty, that's what we do. We offer mental health services and basic needs and a whole set of other services. We are a part of the county, but we're 100% grant funded, so we don't get any funds from the county. We start off with no budget, and what we bring in is what we manage our agency with. We're very concerned about family homelessness, about youth diversion, and we've been very focused for a long time now on North County, and that was a result of the last needs assessment. But we always felt like if there were any emerging needs, we would address those needs, which is why we got into this business. We've got lots of other strategies going at the moment that are not necessarily part of this grant. So we have some work with the executive director of the Annapolis Housing Authority around how do you move 57 families out of a property and move them back in at the end of it. And this is all part of that RAD project where they are redoing Newtown 20. So Newtown 20 will close, it will be rehabbed, and we are working with Beverly Wilborn to talk about taking groups of residents, 10 at a time, trying to figure out where they are, what their basic needs are, how we can move them forward so that if they've got rental arrears, if there are other issues that might prevent them coming back, we can help them come back. So that's one of the projects that we're moving on nothing to do with this grant, but in a sense, everything is to do with this grant. We're also working with the Hood to Good group, which is a group of young students at Phoenix who really are trying to turn their lives around. So we're working on some mentoring with them and the Public Defender's Office. And we've got lots of other pieces that we are doing outside of the grant, funded by other sources, not funded by this grant. But because everybody's always confused about what we're doing and what bit's the grant, I thought I should probably talk about that. So the background on Safe and Thriving Communities I've sort of talked about in a way. It is definitely a collaborative, it's definitely a cooperative agreement. The feds gave us 37 special conditions that we had to agree to before they would give us the first part of the money, so we're busy working through that. The planning is quite prescribed, so we had to set up some sort of a planning team. We had to do a community needs assessment. It had to be a really serious attempt to understand what was happening in Annapolis. It was focused, the way we wrote the grant, it was very focused on low-income housing, not necessarily public housing, but public subsidized and low-income housing. When we wrote the grant, MS-13 was not so visible and there wasn't so much public buzz about MS-13. Now there is. So now the feds are also interested in the work in the city and the county around MS-13. So you'll hear me talk a little bit about that tonight. And so we are also using what we call a collective impact frame. Simply means that we are a collaborative and we believe in collaboration with as many agencies as we can get to the table, with the notion that if we all share an agenda, we have a chance of actually making something work well. And so we are building as much as we can support both from the city and the county for this work, from the residents for this work, from youth, from the faith community, from the school system. Anybody we can drag in, we want to be part of this work. So our role as a partnership is what they call the backbone organization. We are the sort of coordinator of all things within this collective impact model. We've set up an action planning team. The city, county, and private partners that are part of that planning team. We put it under the umbrella of something called Arundel United because that's what the county is using to address race issues inside our county, and so that's part of what we are doing. Obviously now we're trying to work with the Annapolis Public Safety Committee. I can tell you that I really wasn't sure what the Annapolis Public Safety Committee did until I started this grant and then realized that it's been set up and that it's robust and it should be part of this work. We haven't set up work groups yet because we don't know what the strategies are, and obviously we're really trying at some point to really engage the community at large. So I put this slide up here, and I don't know if you can all see it, but it says defining the problem. It seems to me that, and I've been doing this work a long time, I'm just going to say a long time, I'm not going to tell you how long I've been doing it, but too long. And it seems to me that for probably at least 30 years, what we've done as communities, as societies, as nations and everything else is jump to solutions before we ever figured out what the problem was. And so we're all good at coming up with solutions. I've got a host of them, and I could go around this room and say, hey, what do you think the solutions are to gun violence? And you would all come up with 5. I'm not sure that that's ever a good approach. And I really like this quote from Einstein. He basically said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 5 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. So if you wonder about what I'm trying to do now, I'm spending 55 minutes thinking about the problem. I am not in any place thinking about the strategies to solve it. You can't really see this slide, which is a real shame. I threw this in because on Sunday, the Washington Post did an interactive map where you could pull up race and ethnicity by city across the nation. And what was so fascinating about it is not just Annapolis, but across the nation, our cities are very segregated still. So you find that all the white people are clustered, the Hispanic people cluster, and the African Americans cluster. And we are still not at the point where we're seeing integrated communities. And I think that that's just in important in and of itself. And I'm sorry you can't see the slide better, but if you go to the Washington Post, you could play with it for hours. I went and looked at Florida, I looked at New York, I looked at Chicago. Same story wherever you look. Very segregated, very, very segregated communities. So we're not at the melting pot stage at all yet.
Excuse me, Dr. Brown,
Yes.
after we get done, at some point, can you email us a copy of your PowerPoint? That would be
Absolutely.
great.
And you know what? I brought copies.
Oh, good, okay. Great, thank you. Okay, thank you so much. That's all right, that's all right.
The Fed said that we had to be sure we knew what the definition of gangs were. So I asked the chief and I asked our chief, the county chief, and they said, well, basically we're going with the federal definition, which is, you know, here it is. You all know it. I don't need to talk about it. It's more than three. That's an association of individuals that have some of these things. So that's what we're using as our gang definition. These are just some figures around homicides. What's interesting is if you look at deaths by race, ethnicity, you will see that by far in that age group of 15 to 29 years, which is where most homicides are happening now with guns, African Americans are off the charts, like 46%, whereas whites are like 2.39%. These are homicides generally. We mapped them. We have a big map that's got everything on it. We have mapped homicides, we've mapped non-fatals, we've mapped drug overdoses, we've mapped drug arrests, we've mapped school suspensions where we could, we've mapped probation and parole. And, you know, it's quite clear that all of these things cluster around certain communities, and we can name them. So, Bywater, Newtown, Eastport, Admiral Oaks, down by Allen Apartments, they're the areas where you'll see these clusters of issues, which I am sure there's nobody in this room at all surprised by that. This was just the map of homicides. Here's some relevant police statistics on violence. These are getting a little bit old now. The 2017 figures are actually looking better than these, but this is what set us off applying for the grant. It was these figures. So the violent crime rate in Annapolis, 26% above the national violent crime rate, a 900% increase in homicides, majority of victims under 25, 6 victims under 25 and 1 17-year-old, 23 fatal and non-fatal shootings. You can all see this, and you can see that by the time we got to 2016, we were seeing a real spike in gun violence here in Annapolis. So that was the data we had when we applied for the grant. Part of what I've just spent the last 6 months doing is updating lots of that data. So for secondary data, I have a whole PowerPoint on this, guys, and you are welcome to it. But we've looked at school violence, expulsions, probation and parole, serious offences, day and time analysis, and just a shout out to the Chief of Police for the city. Their data analysis folk are wonderful, and they have just worked with us. They're great. We looked at non-fatals, crime trends, aggravated assaults with knives, arrests for homicides, drug overdoses, and we also looked at youth mental health issues, just to like throw it in. And for qualitative data, we've had key stakeholder conversations, we've had community conversations, we have targeted specific groups, and so far I reckon now I've talked to about 130 people. When I am talking to people, all I'm doing is saying, what's going on? So, what's going on in your communities? Why do you think violence is happening? When I was at Eastport Community Centre, I just said to them, why did you show up tonight? And the aim is for me to talk almost not at all and have people just tell me whatever's on their mind. So the next set of slides, and I should say to you that with my other hat, I'm a qualitative researcher, so I've spent many years figuring out how to put qualitative research data together, break it out into themes, and try and make sense. It is subjective work. So let me say to everybody in the room, the next pieces you're going to see are not facts. They are perceptions. They are things that came out of people's mouths. And I just put them together under themes to try to make sense of what people are saying. So this is what people told us about gangs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 7 were identified in African American communities. We have their names and their initials. We asked everybody, well, why are kids going into gangs? And they said, well, they're in every neighborhood. It really starts with rapping. We all like to rap and it's fun. And then, of course, it tends to take a bad turn when drugs get involved. Many very young people are now selling drugs. It's low level. They're not making a lot of money. They're doing it for tennis shoes. They're doing it for clothes. Or they're doing it for food in some cases. But they're not making a killing. A lot of people said that we've got children raising children. I heard that over and over again, that somehow kids are now raising themselves. There's a sort of lack of generational belonging. I think mass incarceration has meant that lots and lots of dads are in jail. And so if you go to public housing and low-income housing, it's all women. It's 85% women head of household. There may be boyfriends in there, but they are not standard two-parent families because many young people are now have landed in jail because of what's been going on. The housing community is moving because of RAD, and we talked a little bit about that. There was a sense that there's a real difference between the African American gangs, which are older and based in community and based in neighborhoods, and some of the things we're seeing from the MS-13 group. That the African American gangs are not as organized. I heard that a lot, they're not as organized. I also heard from a few people that MS-13 and the African American gangs have worked something out.
Dr. Brown, you have to get closer to your mic. We got a phone call.
Oh, sorry. So, I'm so bad. So the word on the street is that the African American gangs and the MS-13 gangs have worked something out, and so they feel a lot safer at the moment. So then I looked at MS-13. I haven't finished this work, so this is all ongoing. But we also have apparently the Latin American Kings. At least 5 people told me that they were hanging around and that was their graffiti around. But whatever the gangs are, there's 4 sects, and they're in the Parole Quiet Waters Allentown Apartments area. They're growing. They're active in schools in Annapolis, but also in places like Glen Burnie and Arnold. There are some elementary school children that are very familiar with MS-13 because their parents have been involved with MS-13, so we've got generational issues. No one wants to snitch, so there's like lots of issues around snitching and telling everybody anything. Nobody's making a lot of money, so here's another example of gangs that are actually not making a killing. Nobody's getting rich with this stuff, at least not at the level we're looking at. MS-13's trade, this is opinion or perception or whatever, is extortion and drug trafficking. Extortion, drugs, and sex trafficking is what I heard. And again, that rumor. So these are quotes from people. When I do research, I like to have actual quotes of what people said. And somebody said, it's very hard to talk to a student about the evilness of drugs and gangs if you know their father, brother, uncle are all in gangs. So I talked a lot to actual real-life youth who lived in subsidized and public housing. What we know about them, without talking to them, is that they're disproportionately suspended and expelled from school, or they drop out. Many of them have fathers in jail. They hear a lot of negative messages about themselves inside the school system and in other places. They're over-medicated. There's a real almost like pill mill going on in schools now around special education and ADHD drugs and anxiety drugs, and so just a lot of drugs around very young children. They're often lured into the drug trade. That some of them are selling drugs to help their families. We've heard a lot about young children, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds smoking pot. And then I heard some from older kids about a fear of being killed for what they know. The kids I talked to had all witnessed some sort of violence. Some had seen death in one of their playgrounds, some had seen bodies in parking lots. So these are children with a lot of trauma. They're traumatized children. They don't feel safe in their communities, they're guarded. I've spent like in my entire life talking to young people. I started out as a teacher and taught teenagers. So spent many, many years. And I find young people more guarded now than I think at any other time. It's quite surprising that they're not like kids in some ways. I talked to some of them who had lost friends or lost family members, and I was trying to say in a very subtle way, you know, have you ever thought about talking to somebody professional like a counselor or whatever? And they talk to one another. That's what it's about. They lean on one another, they talk to their peers. They're not really interested in talking to professionals. A lot of noise about using guns for protection rather than to kill people, that sort of sense of we're not safe, so we need guns. And they feel safe with their peers, they want to belong. And the other thing about kids now that really bothers me is they don't see a future. So kids in this circumstance who are low income, who are living in communities that are unsafe, if you try and talk to them about what they're going to do for their future, they can't get there. They are stuck in today or tomorrow, or it's something fantastic like the NBA, but it is not about a real future. And, you know, for me, that's a huge, huge issue. And again, this sort of, they're raising themselves. And this comes from people who live in the community, from professionals who work with them, from faith community folk. That sort of, the kids are raising themselves. I just heard it over and over again. So guns, everybody has a different opinion about guns, but I heard a lot about there being too many guns, that most households have a gun. Some households have 2 guns, depending whether there's a boyfriend who's also selling drugs. But then everybody said, but they don't come from inside, they come from the outside. So there's the cab drivers who drive around with them in their trunks and sell them off the street. There's a lot of trading guns for drugs. There's some coming from Baltimore City and DC. Some are coming from Calvert County. I don't know. Why Calvert County? Who knows? One thing I did note was that all the youth I talked to could mimic the sound of a gun really accurately. I wrote that down. High school kids have guns, and this notion that guns and drugs are linked. And I'm sure nobody's surprised about that, but sometimes you just have to put it in black and white. Somebody said there have been shootings in our neighborhood for years, but when white people's cars get shot up, then there's action. Violence. I just thought I'd shove that up there. 70% of violent crime happens in the evening from 5 onwards. Violence from school and police shows reduction for 2017. Here's a weird one. So according to probation and parole, aggravated assault has increased every year since 2015. And I'm not sure that it's up there, but I just re-looked at that data. And secondary school, high school violence is going down, but elementary school violence is going up, which I thought was really worrisome. Many people said that youth are violent because they're desperate and that they've learned to accept a level of violence. And when I ask kids, well, do you think that violence is getting less in 2017? A group of 3 said to me, well, they've either died or they've moved away. People are either dead or they've left the neighborhood. Youth have loads of stories of violence, things that they've seen, the whole thing about the body being left in the playground. Most youth said they stay inside as much as they can. These were kids from Eastport, Newtown, Bywater, and Robinwood. And then generally everybody said that there's just a massive lack of trust now inside communities. Somebody said it's not getting better. Summer's not here yet. When I talked about is it getting better, it's not getting better. Summer's not here yet. So let's hope that that's not prophetic. I just missed my drugs one. Oh, let me go back. Sorry. Okay, so a lot of people said, well, drugs are just a solution to hopelessness. Let me bring this mic here. It's a career path. So on the positive note, several people talked about this as entrepreneurial within community. If you can't get a job any other way, then selling drugs is a business, right? And so there was this sense that, yeah, it's a career path. That youth sell money to buy clothes or buy things for their mum or that sort of, you know, basic needs sort of stuff. But then we heard more about people coming into the community to sell drugs and then leaving the community. So, you know, is it the community or is it people coming into the community? And there was a lot of, and this has been written about a lot in research, the notion that communities are purposefully enslaved by drugs and that it's purposefully done. The entire system of the nation is to have drugs be part of the economy, and at the lowest level, they come into communities. So I'm pretty neutral about that, but I don't think there's anybody in this room that won't have heard that at some point. This was interesting. Somebody said, you know, the drugs used to always come into Annapolis when the boat show came in, which I thought was just like a really, I've never thought of the boat show as a caveat for drugs. And that the highest level person who lives in the community has no idea how the drugs get into the community, that they are not the caveat for bringing drugs in. In one group, they talked about an increasing role for women and girls in drugs and violence. This, you know, is something new for the communities that had not been the case before. I heard this in at least 4 groups. The loss of the church as a supporting institution, that young people were not as engaged in the church, a sense that the grandmas were beginning to disappear, and it was the grandmas that had held on to church as a stabilizing force, and that was not only going, but it was a very bad thing that it was going.
Dr. Brown, I have a question
Yeah.
about this loss of the church as an institution. Were you getting this from the young people or the older people, or?
No, that did not come up in any youth groups. That came up across community conversations, in about 3 or 4 different community conversations. That people would raise the church, and then people would say, we're not getting the attendance. And then, you know, they would talk amongst themselves and say, my grandma used to make me go to church. And then someone else would say, oh, my grandma used to make me go to church. And they'd all have stories about how they were made to go to church, and that behavior was beginning to die. So that was the point.
Okay, thank you.
And then talking about violence, drugs are at the bottom of this. Whether you're dealing drugs, you're arrested because of drugs, or your mother is on drugs. So that feeling that you can lay all of this at the door of drugs. So schools, teachers are writing black children off. One youth heard them talking about those black children. There's only one school community ambassador. There used to be many. Where have they gone? There was a conversation about this, how children graduate now. And we've got into this habit of calling it graduation every year, so that there's a sense that if you graduate in the 8th grade, somehow you've graduated. So I just stuck that up there because I thought it was interesting. There's no career paths for youth in school. The VOTEC programs now are really hard to get into. That's absolutely true. I know that personally. The schools are separate, and they're separating more, that they're not part of the community. And then this focus on testing and academics rather than music and sport and some of the other things that we think of as enrichment for kids are not happening in schools anymore. The amount of children, and I mean, I know this from the facts, you know, an African American child is 3 times more likely to be, actually it's more like 4 times more likely to be suspended from school than a white child. And yet then I heard from another group that said that schools are safe havens because kids don't want to go back to their communities because they feel safe in school. There's this notion that there needed to be an advisory committee from the communities that was advising the school board, and that schools should really be far more understanding of much of the trauma that children have seen when they're walking through the school doors, that like a trauma-informed approach from schools would be more important. Typical comments, some teachers have attitudes, they don't care, they let you leave the class. That was seen as a don't care from a teacher, just letting kids walk out of class. They don't praise you for something good you did. And the police focus on street-level dealers. The kids said this, the police need to be more relational, and I was trying to imagine what that would look like from a police officer's point of view, you know, how to be relational. And then the adults said, I wish the police had talked to us. They're always talking to the kids, but they don't talk to the adults and the seniors in the community. So you guys can't win. You know, you're either not, whatever. And so we heard that the police were in the community from the kids, but the adults said, the cops only come when there's been a shooting, they'll go away again. And then we heard there was a fear of talking to the police because of the lack of confidentiality, the feeling that if they told, that it wouldn't be confidential, and some drug dealer down the street or some guy who'd shot somebody would find out that they'd told. So lots of that sort of, we can't do that, it's too scary. Police ride in and out of the community, police have to show they have a heart. I pull this up because a police officer said this to me. We get 36,000 calls, that should be a year, not a day. We get 36,000 calls a year. We need anonymous tips. We need the community to trust us. I mean, if you think of it from the police point of view, 36,000 calls a year, and they've got 100 officers, and there's a whole issue of recruitment for city police. Now the county police wages have gone up. So lots and lots of issues, I think, for city police. They're not at capacity. They need more cops, and they need to be able to pay them a living wage. This is Annapolis. But somebody said this. It doesn't mean it's real, guys. It means that this is the perception. It's kind of hard to get the families and children in Annapolis to trust the police when they're kicking your door in and they're looking for the wrong person and they don't have an up-to-date address. So that's the sort of thing that gets generated inside the community. So that's the end of where I'm at the moment. There's lots more data to be gathered. I'm meeting with the county police chief. I was supposed to do it this week, but I think I'm doing it next week to talk more about where the MS-13 task force is. There's only going to be certain things he can tell me. I did one focus group with the Hispanic community, but I want to do another because I want to talk to more actual community members. These were people who worked in the community. So that's where we're at. And to be honest, I look at all that data and I say, where do you start in terms of strategies? Where do you start? And $700,000, well, actually, it's going to be way less. It's going to, by the time we're finished, it's going to be about $550,000 that's Fed money to spend on strategies. So one of our planning team is actually trying to get a big philanthropist to the table so that we don't just have that money. Because there feels like lots and lots of issues here. Now, there may be some, no-cost, low-cost strategies. I think Chief Baker's working on some really good strategies that actually don't cost a lot of money. But there's obviously some real communication issues, trust issues, and just kids not doing well. They're just not doing well. They are traumatized, they are scared. You can think of them as bad kids, but they are kids, I think, who are very, very troubled and very traumatized with no outs. It feels like there's no outs for them, and that's not a good place for any human being to be in. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. I think Alderman Payon has a few questions for you.
All right.
All right,
Lay them on me.
Dr. Brown, I note that this is mostly grant funded, is that correct?
It is.
And how long does that grant last?
So it's a 3-year grant. We're in the first year.
I'm sorry?
It's a 3-year grant.
Okay.
We're in the first year. It's federal, so it's September to October. So we'll start year 2 in October. There'll be that year and then the next year. And that is supposed to be when they'll actually let us spend money on strategies if they like them, if they agree with our strategies. So they're very keen to use evidence-based strategies, which has become the sort of flavor of the month, that everything's got to be somehow researched and tested before you can suggest it or use it, so we're obviously going to be dealing with some of that. We have the other cohorts that we can talk to. We have some promising work going on in Chicago again, so there's other things to look to. But I think, you know, we've got to look at all the information. We're doing resource mapping now, so where are the resources, where are the things that already exist? You know, are there ways to braid pieces together in a different way? What do the police need? You know, what is it that we do at this point to improve the circumstance for these kids?
All right, is this grant renewable after 3 years?
It is not, which is why we want to bring a philanthropist to the table who can bring some other deep pockets to the table. Because the truth is, this is not a lot of money. It really isn't. So we need to pull in some other dollars. I think what it may do is get us on a road. And once we get on a road, it's easier to sell to other funders. And it will end up being diversified funding. I mean, my office has about 25 different funding sources running through it at any given time. There are no longer any long, sustainable sources of individual grant funding. You have to figure out how to diversify across a range.
All right, I guess I've got a little trouble understanding how this will reduce crime. I mean, I'm looking at, the office will provide needs assessments, community planning, some basic needs, family homelessness. Is this a partnership that you have tried in other jurisdictions? Has it worked? Has it reduced crime?
That's what we do. That's not this grant. That's what my agency does now.
Okay. Well, how do you expect this money to be used?
I have no idea. We haven't got there yet.
Okay.
And we are told by the feds that we are not to get there yet. So they are coming down next week to meet with us for a day and a half to see how our planning is going, to see what our community assessment looks like.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Payon. Dr. Brown, we've had several conversations and a lot of communication going on, and I just want to kind of put it out there. I mean, the city is looking to be an integral part of this process, mainly because it's talking about, and the grant addresses our children, our families within the city limits. That's number one. Number two, I have had an opportunity to briefly chat with the mayor about this, had a meeting with Ms. Sutherland, and what we have done is put together a piece of legislation that will be introduced at City Council on next Monday, which will hopefully, the legislation is to house the Office of Community Development and Violence Prevention within the mayor's office. We're looking, because I've done some research, we're looking at 3 persons to staff that office. A chief, which would be probably, based on the information that I'm getting, would be a person with an MSW, because a lot of this circles around health, and that's usually the primary cause of a lot of things. A community outreach specialist, as well as an administrative assistant part-time. We're aligning the legislation, and I can send you a copy of what's going to come out next week. It's definitely aligned with what you're doing. In fact, we are incorporating your grant into the piece of legislation itself. Because I know, being here all my life, some of this is surprising, but most of it is not. Mainly, a lot of it, because I do work with in the school system, and so it's not totally foreign. And Sharon McKell and I were the ones who started the Community Ambassadors Program. I can tell you what happened, exactly what happened to it. I'm not going to talk about it on the record. So a lot of this I already know about. We have 3 strategic people within the mayor's office who are willing to put their nose to the grindstone. One being Janice Hayes Williams, who is now the Constituent Services Director, also the Ombudsman and the ADA Coordinator. Will Rao, whom you know is on one of your committees, who's the Community Outreach Person, and Adatola Adaye, who is now the African American Community Services Person, as well as Adriana Lee, who's now the Hispanic liaison. We have Larry Griffin. So we have 5 people already that are working in the office. And because we're the Public Safety Committee, and in order to assure public safety, we need to work on health, education, and those types of things in order to ensure that we do have public safety. So we've been working very hard. I've had a meeting also with the new Chief of Staff, Susie Smith, who does regularly attend the Eastport Working Together meetings. She's on board. So we've got everybody on board in the mayor's office. I did send all of this information to all the persons, Payon and Henson as well, just to kind of bring them up to speed. But we have people, and those people who have lived in Annapolis, grew up in Annapolis, and probably like me are not totally surprised by this, but it's good we have this document to say, yes, you talk to these folks, yes, this is what we've got, because many of us went to school with a lot of these people, and we kind of have a general idea. So I think having this office housed within the mayor's office, I think will be huge, which would be a huge benefit. I think it's a great mechanism to move forward as far as working on these issues. I definitely do not think it's insurmountable. I think we can do it. We have a lot of people right here in this room right now that we're going to be working on. In fact, this summer, we've had at least one meeting. The goal for the Public Safety Committee, and as far as the mayor's office is concerned, is to have a safe summer. And what we're looking to do is to take every child from birth to 24, youth, that will have at least one meaningful activity this summer, whether it's a camp, a pop-up camp, an internship, a job, whatever it is, because Mr. Tola will be going around knocking on doors to make sure that every child is signed up for something. So when they go back to school in September, they will be proud and excited to say, I did this summer. We're looking at pop-up camps, whether it's a week-long camp at Stanton Center, where they will be talking about nutrition and grocery shopping, to a pop-up camp with cake and cupcake decorating and everything else in between. We'll work with Anne Arundel Workforce and all the entities that we can work with in order to make this happen. The chief and all came up with the idea we're going to have movie nights. We're also going to start a band this summer who will go from community to community, who are made up of city employees. Ms. Sutherland plays a mean saxophone, and she's going to be part of that as well. So we've got a lot of things we've talked about. We're looking, because the city, unprecedented last year, has a MOU with the school system as well as with the health department. The school system is for the city. We'll be providing the school system with money to hire community ambassadors. They just increased the amount of pay. It's been at $10 since 2006 when it started. It is now up to $17.50, and now people are coming to the table who are being hired to fill those positions, and they will be assigned to different communities. We'll also have 1 or 2 assigned to Annapolis Middle School. So we're working on that. So that's an MOU that the city has with the school system. We also have an MOU with the health department, providing the Strengthening Families program, and you're very familiar with that. So we're attacking this issue on many, many fronts. We've got a lot of people who are willing to help. Like I said, that many of them are in this room. The police and fire are taking some interns this summer and giving them job opportunities. The mayor started, and he's going to have several. So we're doing a lot, but I'm glad, I am so happy that you have done this tremendous work. You all are commended for doing what you've done. This gives us a great roadmap as to which directions we need to go. But we also need to talk about the older people as well. But we're going from birth to 24. I have a meeting on the 23rd with the family tree as well as DSS director and HACA. So we're going to talk about some things from birth to 5. So we are on it, and we've been on it for the past 2 years, the Street Corner Ministries Coalition. So we're definitely partnering with you. But of course, in order to do a lot of this, we do need some assistance as far as financially, and that's why Ms. Sutherland is here today. She's been excellent so far. She's only been here a few weeks, but we're looking to see what we can leverage and help with the county, because the bottom line is, these residents are the city's residents, and they're gonna be looking to us to try to fix some of these problems and these issues, because we're the people that's closest to them. So, thank you so very, 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 very much for all you've done over these past years. I've known you since 2004, and you're still at it. Thank goodness you all are still at it. Thank
So
you.
Can I just say two
Sir,
things?
oh, go, anything.
So, first of all, I absolutely understand, and we all understand, that we've got two speeds here. The city can't just stop because we're busy doing planning. I mean, you're dealing with real issues inside your city. So there's necessarily a sort of planning going on where there's a whole load of activities going on, and I understand that. And we're doing some of that ourselves, and there's nothing we can do about that because everybody has got to address as they move along. And I do hope that down the road we'll all work in alignment and cooperatively together. When I say I have no idea how this money is going to be spent, I do not. I don't. And I think, nor will I make that decision. And I hope that the feds will help us figure out how to make that decision. And it might be that we already have the idea, or a set of ideas, or a whole set of different ideas. And we'll know that, I guess, by August. That's when we're supposed to know that, or at least know what we're looking at. But I think the second thing to bear in mind, I'm a prevention person. My entire life has been, how do you prevent all this before it starts? How do you have the right health, the right mental health, the right services, the right school system, the right everything, so that children don't get in trouble in the first place? That's where I always am. But that's not what this grant is. This grant is an anti-violence grant. The feds are very clear about it. They are looking at areas where there is violence, and whereas they understand the link between community issues and violence, they are looking for anti-violence strategies, not health and human services strategies, which is where I usually am.
And this is what you have here. So if this is somewhat of a roadmap to get to that point, I mean, this is the roadmap to get to this tells us what we need. Now, whether the feds look at that as a template to move forward, I don't know. All I know is, I mean, the feds can tell us what they think, but we're living here, and we're living it every day. Now, there's a plan A and a plan B. There's, as my dad used to say, you can work with them or work around them. But there is a solution that we can come up with. I am totally committed to the solution. We can work around the feds, but we're going to have to do some of these things because violence just doesn't appear out of nowhere.
It does not.
Violence comes from just what you gave us today.
Yep.
And we can't move away from this. This is the reason for the season.
Yep. All right, everybody. I know that was long, so I apologize.
No,
It was
it's
so long.
never too long.
But-
Never.
And you have to remember that that work is subjective. You will love it, Chief Baker. I got all the data in one PowerPoint for our next meeting, so yay! So we're just going to keep on going, and I
Okay.
hope that the city and the county work really close together on this. Because
Absolutely.
whereas it's happening inside the city, it's going to take all of our resources and all of our efforts and all of our energy and wisdom to fix it.
Right. I have not gotten any emails from you all as far as the next meeting is concerned. I don't know if I'm off the radar or
You're
what.
not off the radar. It's probably that we've been doing community conversations.
Okay.
So I'm got to go to Eastport Community tomorrow night, and
Yeah.
I've got some key stakeholders. So we're in a bit of a pause because I was pulling all this stuff together.
Okay, great. But thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next month as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to come every month, guys, but I'm not going to do this every month. I promise. I'm not.
That's all right. We appreciate whatever you bring to us.
Okay, but I do want to update you on how we're moving and what's happening. And we've got this blessed site visit coming up from the feds, and they're going to stay a day and a half. I don't
Is anyone from the city gonna be available to,
We haven't even started to plan it, so I'm not sure what to do with it.
because you have a meeting, you say, next week with them?
I wonder if we should maybe they should meet the mayor. I don't know. I mean, obviously we've got to talk about our work and what we're doing.
Yes.
They want to be driven around the communities. They want to see what communities we're focusing on.
I would like to be a part of it.
It's a day and a half.
Is that possible?
Yeah, well, you can, we could bring them here.
Okay, I would love to meet with them.
Well, yeah,
Let me know.
I'm happy.
Let me know and I'll
I
make
don't
room in my
want to
schedule.
With like 5 beds for a day and a half.
I don't care.
Fine.
I'll do it. You let me know where and when, and I'll be there.
Okay, now they are gonna meet with the planning team, we think on the 17th, so that's what they're saving for at the moment. All right, guys.
Okay, thank you so very much again.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. All right. Okay, next matter on the agenda is okay, next matter on the agenda is ID 14718, quarterly briefing from the Annapolis Fire Department Planning Section. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Good evening,
Good
gentlemen.
evening.
Introduce yourselves, please.
Deputy Fire Chief Kevin Simmons, Director of Office of Emergency Management.
Battalion Chief John Ortlieb, Battalion Chief of Planning.
Captain John Muhich, Fire Marshal's Office. Captain Philip Morris, Training Division.
Fine. Thank you so much for being here.
So I know we're under time constraints, so we'll give a quick quarterly report. If you remember last meeting, Chief O'Malley gave a quarterly report on the operations section. We'll give a quarterly report on the planning section, and you should have a handout with the cover as an org chart. If you look at that org chart, that kind of lays out the planning section. Everybody kind of understands operations with the ambulances and the fire trucks, but then this is the other half of the fire department. And you can see that under me to the left is the Office of Emergency Management. And the neat thing about the Office of Emergency Management is my salary, the Deputy Director Dave Mendel's salary, Nicole Queen, they're all partially paid by grant funding. And then you have Planner 1, Patrick Donlin, Planner 2, Mary Kate Hudson, Exercise Training and Outreach, Hannah Thomas. They're all paid fully with grants, full-time. And on the other side, you have Battalion Chief John Ortlieb, who you'll hear from a little later. He's Battalion Chief of Planning. We have the Community Outreach and Media Affairs. Everybody knows Kenny White. We have Training, Captain Phil Morris. You'll hear from him. And then you have the Fire Marshal's Office, John Muhich. You'll hear from them. So it's a total of 10 folks in the planning section with 3 contractual employees.
Okay.
So on that note, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Battalion Chief John Ortlieb, who'll start talking a little bit about planning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having us here tonight. As Chief said, I'm Battalion Chief John Ortlieb, Battalion Chief of Planning, so my responsibilities include Fire Marshal's Office, Training Division, our Health and Safety, Public Information, and also assisting in the hiring process. So just to start off right off the bat, we are currently want to give you an update on our lateral hiring process, which is specifically for lateral firefighters, EMTI, and paramedics. We are only looking for ALS providers. As of the end of the first quarter of this calendar year, we had 41 applicants. We had 6 of which were qualified for a interview. They were extended offers, and we only had 4 show up. We are continuing. This is an ongoing hiring process, meaning that the position is open until filled. Um, Then we also want to give you an update on 1901 West. I know that was a concern of yours. The Fire Marshal's office, and most of the planning section, uniform planning section was out at 1901 West on, it was May 1st. We tested all areas of the building, and we found numerous fire alarms that were not functioning. The alarm company was out there on site with us as we were going through the visit. Management company was also participating, so we're hopefully be getting an update back from them telling us that they have fixed the issue shortly. Then I wanted, since our community outreach and media affairs is not here, I'll go into that tonight. So just a couple little highlights that what we have been doing. We've had 19 public education events performed by fire marshal personnel, and we've reached over 3,000 people. These include character counts. Kenny White is heavily involved in the Character Counts program. If you're not familiar with Character Counts, it takes community members and they talk about the 6 core values of, 6 core pillars of character. And those are trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. So Kenny goes out to Mills Parole School, I think twice a month, meets with the kids and discusses these issues. We've also done a marine safety program where we've gone down to, I believe it's the Severn Sailing Association, and worked with fire extinguishers. We have done elderly safety in the home at both Baywood Gardens, and then we've also been fortunate enough to be getting some attention from the local news. So we've done 6 live interviews with ABC2 News, WBAL, and WNAV. I just wanted to update you on something that we have coming up on May 19th. That is the home fire sprinkler day, and this is a chance that is put for us to educate the general public about the safety of sprinklers in the home and the benefit. So we will be having this event at the Eastport Fire Station beginning at 9 a.m. Everyone is invited. This event will also include a live demonstration of the importance of fire sprinklers, and I believe Captain Muhich can talk about the trailer that will be coming in. It will have a hands-only CPR and a stop the bleed class as well. And that's all I have for you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Once
Good
again,
evening.
I'm Captain John Muhich from the Annapolis Fire Marshal's Office. My 2 main areas of responsibility of the Fire Marshal's Office are public education and life safety. Our public education programs are community-wide. We have programs pretty much designed for every age group, from youth to adults to seniors. We offer station tours, school visits, and many other community outreach programs. For life safety, our office reviews new plans, construction, remodeling to make sure they meet the current life safety codes. We conduct annual and triennial inspections of all commercial buildings within the city of Annapolis. Of course, you know that the annual inspections are required for all buildings in the historic district, all commercial buildings in the historic district. We meet with local homeowners associations to discuss life safety issues. We install free smoke and CO detectors at no cost to city residents in the city of Annapolis. So if you know of someone or someone needs a smoke detector or CO alarm, we will actually go out and schedule an appointment and we'll install it for them. That is something that is very important to us in the city of Annapolis. Once again, it is at no cost, and it's one of the many things that we do in the Fire Marshal's Office. One of the major projects we have going on right now is, as Chief Wortley discussed, we are currently in the process of gathering floor plans for every school, state building, county building, city building, house of worship, nursing homes, 55 and older communities, assemblies, commercial structures, and all commercial structures in the city of Annapolis. It's important for us as the fire department to have this information on hand 24/7. We'll share this information with the Annapolis Police Department and our partners in Anne Arundel County. And one of the main reasons for this is if we have an emergency, we now have, when I started, everything was on paper. And we now have tablets in all the apparatus, so we can look up the floor plans and we can narrow down where the problems may be. It helps us mitigate loss of both property and life. As spoken to before, we're going to be having the Home Fire Sprinkler Day at the Eastport Fire Station. We are bringing in a home fire sprinkler safety trailer, and we'll actually light part of that trailer on fire. There'll be 2 rooms that the public can view. One will show what happens when there is a sprinkler in the room. and want to show what happens when there's not a sprinkler in the room. It should be a very dynamic day. I invite everybody to attend. One of the other things that is very important to us is our connection to the community. As most of you know, I started the Annapolis Santa Run approximately 15 years ago, and one thing that we like to do is we like to reach out to the community, and we found out just recently about the Backpack Buddies program for Anne Arundel County Public Schools. We found out that they are having a very serious need right now. Some of their funding has gone away. So during the Sprinkler Safety Day at the Eastport Firehouse, we are sponsoring a canned food drive. Our goal is to fill our utility 35, which is a pickup truck with a cap on it, and drop that off Monday morning. And the Fire Marshal's office, to kick off this event, is starting with a $200 donation out of our own pockets to go and buy food to start this program. So we hope to fill that in. And we have many partners on that day. Some of the partnering groups for that day are going to be the Annapolis Police Department, the Eastport Volunteers, Rescue Hose Volunteers, and our Old Annapolis Local 1926.
Are you all working with specific schools in
Yes, we are.
Annapolis? Mhm.
Everything stays within the city of Annapolis.
Which ones are you working with?
Right now, we're working with Annapolis Elementary School.
Okay.
And anything that they have that is needed anyplace else, from my understanding, they are all connected, and so that is our point of contact at this point in time.
Okay.
So, we also had two of the other cooperating organizations are Chesapeake Antique Fire Apparatus Association, so we'll have some antique fire trucks there, and the Eastport United Methodist Church. So, on that note, I'll turn it over to our training captain, Captain Morris.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Phil Morris, Captain of the Training Division. I've been with the Training Division since the middle of January. My main areas of responsibility are processing and assisting with training requests in reference to local and nationally recognized training facilities. Maryland Fire Rescue Institute, the National Fire Academy, MIMS, as well as any other training, regional training facilities. I attend a statewide council of academies monthly, as well as a quarterly local emergency planning commission. The agendas typically discuss current training events, future multi-jurisdictional training opportunities, as well as review and improve current state-level training courses. I'm in charge of assigning and monitoring the department's monthly training activities for all our personnel. On average, the division assigns 10 to 12 hours of mandatory training. Anything additional is at the company level officer's discretion. We average about 16 to 20 hours per person per month, which also equates to our ISO rating. We have a 20% increase just for the first quarter from last year in training hours for the department as a whole. In addition to the training activities, I also manage the air maintenance room for the department, which is responsible for all our self-contained breathing apparatus, our rapid intervention bags, confined space bags, and face pieces to meet the National Fire Protection Association standards. Current classes that the Annapolis Fire Department has hosted, we've actually hosted more classes in the first quarter than we have in the last year. We hosted a MSA, which is a SCBA brand technician level repair class, which actually reduces costs for the city because we repair, test, and certify all our own air packs as opposed to using an outside vendor. We held a Instructor 2 course, which is a mid-level instructional course, which assists with interdepartment training as well as sending recruit training officers to Millersville Training Academy, which is where we send all our employees, our new recruits. And finally, we did a joint National Fire Academy, Maryland Fire Rescue Institute Leadership Series 1, 2, and 3 weekends in March, which is professional development for both firefighters and company officers. Builds on the skills taught in the basic Fire Officer 1 and 2 certifications. Just some updates on our latest hires. In January, second week of January, we had 4 lateral entry employees, which were previously trained. They They joined us for a 2-week mini academy where we went over city policy, department procedures. We had 4 practical sessions at both Millersville, Taylor Avenue, and the Upper Eastern Shore Training Facility. They had been released to duty and assigned field training officers, so they check in with field training officers on every shift. They have a rookie book, which is almost complete. They have 6 months to complete it, and they've almost completed it in half that time. And on February 8th, we had 8 new recruits. So no training, or very little training. A few of them had EMT. They were assigned to day work with us prior to starting the academy. This is something new that we tried. We had a regimented physical fitness program that we had 2 hours a day in the morning at the Pip Moyer. They were very helpful, their staff over there. We did 2 hours of PT, then we either broke to the Taylor Avenue Fire Station training room or the Emergency Operations Center, where we went over the same thing as far as administrative, OSHA and state-related mandated tests. And then on February 22nd, they reported to Millersville with firefighter first class McGill, who's seated in the back here as their recruit training officer. They're currently almost halfway through the academy. There's 58 recruits in this current academy at the Anne Arundel Training Academy. We have 7 now, and I'm happy to report currently, out of those 58 people, Annapolis recruits hold the top 2 positions in both academic as well as a class leader position. And finally, we held the training division over the course of February and March, held 4-hour training sessions for all patrol officers in the Annapolis Police Department, focusing on the topics of bleeding control, Narcan administration, naloxone, as well as CPR and the Rescue Task Force training. And Rescue Task Force training is a joint training that we are working together to work towards another practical exercise similar to what we had at St. John's last year, focusing on active assailant training. And I'd like to invite you all to the graduation for Recruit Class 57, which will be on September 14th. And I can send you all an email as far as location and time if you'd like to attend. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
So finally, the last part of our quarterly report will be the Office of Emergency Management, and Deputy Director Dave Mandel will give a quick report.
Thank you, Chief, and good evening. Dave Mandel once again with the Office of Emergency Management. Emergency Management had a very big first quarter of the year. In March, I think we set a record with the number of activations of the Emergency Operations Center with 5. Most notably is the emergency sheltering of Lighthouse residents in early March. I know you're familiar with that. About 50 residents of the Lighthouse unexpectedly in the middle of the night got evacuated by the fire department, transported by the Department of Transportation, and coordinated between first the Stanton Center and then Pip Moyer with Rec and Parks and Emergency Management. So that was a 4-day real-world shelter incident. Also, there was a winter weather episode that closed the city for a day, I'm sure you remember, which also activated the Emergency Operations Center. There were some other smaller events as well, but that was a very significant month. I think the most significant we've had in terms of number of activations. I'd also like to mention and thank the council actually once again for your approval of the hazard mitigation plan. That was unanimous, so we really appreciate that support. It's a really important plan because it maintains our eligibility as a city for both pre-disaster mitigation funding before a disaster to help us plan for it, and also disaster reimbursement funding after a disaster does occur. And the mitigation funding does include maintaining our eligibility for the large $3 million grant that is still pending and going through approval. So thank you, Council, again for approving that plan. Here are the final numbers on the Stanton Center Overnight Winter Relief Program. 2017-2018 winter season, it was a busy, busy winter. I think December was one of the coldest months we've seen in years. in terms of the course of the entire month, average temperature. The Stanton Center opened 56 times this winter, 56 times, and we received a total of 855 referrals, 855 visits, total visits over the winter period. As you know, Emergency Management provides administrative oversight of the Stanton Center Overnight Winter Relief Program, and We Care and Friends nonprofit provides the trained staff and manages day-to-day operations. I'd also like to mention the Office of Emergency Management is continuing our training of city personnel. Lately, our focus has been the new mayor's office staff. In fact, just last week we had the newest folks, Adriana Lee and Adetola Ajayi, in our EOC for call center training. So we're getting them acclimated and trained up on our systems, and they're ready to work the call center, which should be really exciting. So that's what's been going on this first quarter. I do want to mention a couple of highlights for the next couple months that you'll hear from us next time we do another report. I believe the chief announced at the end of last week that the annual citywide preparedness exercise will take place on August 16th this year, August 16th. So that's one of our biggest days of the year. We bring everyone together, city, council, personnel, volunteers, everybody, to test and maximize our readiness as a city for an emergency, disaster, or crisis. So please mark your calendars for that. This year is going to be the return of Hurricane Anna. We did that about 7 years ago now, but we thought it was a good time to bring it back out with the new administration. Finally, spring outreach season is underway, and we are giving a ton of presentations in May and beyond. In fact, what I'm looking at our list here of presentations, we always give presentations to local community groups, resident associations, homeowners associations, and schools, and that's always going to continue. What's interesting about this year is we're starting to branch out into larger audiences. The chief will be presenting to a national conference in this summer, later in July, and we'll be presenting to the state symposium, the State Emergency Management Symposium in May, later this month. I'll be giving a couple of presentations, one to the inaugural State of the Coast Conference that Department of Natural Resources is running in Cambridge in May, in addition to a regional annual meeting of a regional conference, actually just down the street here in Annapolis, also in May. Like I said, there are a ton of presentations that are ongoing. Look forward to doing those as well.
Great, thank you so much. You're all on the cutting edge, I see. And other folks are looking at us to set the standard. That's always good.
So we thank you for your attention. If
Well,
you have any
thank you.
questions, we'll be glad to answer them.
No. Alderman Payne? No. All right, none from me. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Appreciate it. You do the same. Next is our update from Annapolis Police Department, ID 14818. Chief Baker, welcome back.
My only update is that it's halfway through the first period.
Nothing,
and
nothing.
Nothing in the hockey game.
I got that.
So, just a couple of quick things.
Okay.
I was recently invited by the DEA to travel to El Salvador with other police executives from Maryland and Northern Virginia. We had the opportunity to meet with the U.S. ambassador and her team at the embassy and discuss the things that the United States is doing to help El Salvador deal with MS-13 locally. And it's not just enforcement and incarceration, but it ranges from into community policing as well, and some sort of diversion programs for the youth. It's interesting, some of the facts that we've learned was that 25% of the El Salvadorian population lives in the United States. And a lot of that is through temporary protective status from the early 90s when there was a guerrilla warfare, and then when there was a natural disaster, others were granted temporary status as well. 18% of their economy is made up through remittance, meaning dollars being sent back from the United States to El Salvador to family members. it seems, based on the information that we got, that it seems that people are planning, the money's coming back in large numbers, but they're also saving a lot of money. And the thought process is that they're planning on being returned once their TPS is up in the United States. And so they're kind of dealing with that, and how do you deal with this influx of people in the United States is helping with that process. So we met with the U.S. ambassador and her team. We also met with the Attorney General of El Salvador, the Director of the National Police of El Salvador, and we also had the opportunity to go to the International Law Enforcement Academy. And it's a police executive academy. It was built by the United States, state-of-the-art facilities, and that is where executives from South America and Central America go for police leadership, different investigative schools, and that line. I kind of compare it to the FBI National Academy, the executive. It was very impressive. We got a lot of, obviously, information about how they're working with MS-13 in that area. It was broken down by what the members do, the regional programs. So there's an East Coast program that we're a part of, an MS-13 that runs basically from Florida up through Long Island and into New England. So it was all very interesting, but probably the best information that we got was from our DEA partners and the programs we were able to have. We spent a lot of time together, and we were able to establish really good relationships and learn about the programs that they have that we may not know about. And one program is called Domestic Cartel Investigations. And when you think of cartel, you think of this big organization, and that's not the way it works. They actually work from street level on up. So we've had, when I explained a particular case to them that started all this violence in Annapolis in 2016, they were like, that's the perfect case. So now we know what we're looking at. We know that they have resources, including money, personnel, and equipment that we can tap into in the future. And so they're very enthusiastic about coming to local jurisdictions and helping out on the lower end. So I'm really pleased about that, and we've actually started thinking about people that we can target in the area. One of the other things that I want to talk about was I appeared before the Finance Committee today, and we were talking very briefly about hiring and retention. And what I'm going to ask the members of the Public Safety Committee is that when it comes time to discuss the budget, please think about the Annapolis Police Department and the competition that's out there for good law enforcement personnel. I think that we are in the fight that we've never been in before. It's very difficult to hire police officers at this time. It's not just, you have the social aspects of it, but you have the competition among law enforcement agencies. And when the economy gets good, people tend not to go to the government for jobs. They tend to go to the private sector. And that's what we're fighting. Anne Arundel County is getting a 15% pay raise over 2 years. That's going to be tough to compete with, but we have to be inventive, and I'm looking to the council to find ways to find money to keep people here. If we don't keep what we have, it's going to be very difficult to keep Annapolis safe. We know that the number of officers correlates to public safety. And so I'm just hoping that when that budget discussion comes around that you'll think about the police department and look for alternatives. We're in contract negotiations now, so I can't talk too much about it. But there's other things that need to be done. One of those that I brought up today was a training budget. Our training budget is $42,000, and the last time I checked, which is about 2009, but our number hasn't changed since 2009. We were the lowest per capita per employee budgeted for training, and I don't think you want your police officers to have the lowest budget for training. Also, we don't have a line item for recruitment. And we've got to be creative in recruitment. We've got to be able to travel. It's very difficult to become a police officer in New York and New Jersey and further north. And if we could take our show on the road and do a recruiting process, 3 or 4 steps at one time on a weekend, I think that would go a long way to bringing people in. Last year we hired 16 people and we had a net gain of 1. And this year we're probably looking about the same thing with already planned retirements. And we've lost 1 person to the county already. Right now we're forecasting 9, but that's not including what may apply to the county based on the pay raise they just got.
What's the starting pay right now for a city police officer?
52,000. It's right in that ballpark.
Is that competitive? I know that Anne Arundel County is apparently coming up with pay raises, substantial pay raises.
15% over 2 years. We're competitive right now. We'll be somewhere in the ballpark, maybe the parking lot, when they get their 15% raise. But one of the benefits they also have is a take-home car. So that's an added perk that they have that we don't. So when the budget discussion comes around, please think about those items.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm not gonna necessarily compare you all to Anne Arundel County Public Schools, but I know in the past, they've done recruiting in other states. And from what I've been told and what I kinda see, it never pans out. People come here from Idaho, Colorado, Utah. It's a whole, I'm not gonna use the word culture, but it's a different place. I don't know if that's what you have in mind, as far as recruitment. Some people or some, I guess, places look for recruitment close to home. Others go far away. I don't know what your theory is on that.
My theory is that you have to recruit every place, every minute, every day. And I was at the car wash the other day, and one of the individuals walked up to me and said, "Hey, I'd like to be a police officer." I'm like, "Here." And he sent me an email today, sent him the link for the application. So,
Well,
always
that's-
doing it.
yeah.
But I think, to your point, we have people from New Jersey who have been here for 8 years. We have a female who came with her, well, actually more than one, I guess. He doesn't count. And we have a female who came from New York with her 2 kids and is doing fantastic work.
Okay.
So they're out there. We just
Good.
need to find them.
Okay, fine. I mean, do you have some kind of marketing campaign, or it's just kind of word of mouth, one-on-one kind of thing?
Right now it's word of mouth, and that's why I need a recruitment budget. I think that, the competition is such that you have to be flashy and you have to be inventive. One of the biggest things on Facebook was the fact that a police department did a recruiting video and it was Star Wars. And so you've just got, right now you got to think outside the box.
Right. Yeah. Okay, all right.
All right.
Alderman Perry, you have any other questions at this point?
So I'd just like to mention that last Wednesday we graduated 14 people from our First Citizens Academy this year. We're hoping that they'll write to the Capitol and tell them what a good experience they had, but based on the comments, it looks like our Citizens Police Academy will grow. So the next one is scheduled for the fall.
Okay.
And to wrap things up, number-wise, real briefly, overall crime is down 24% this year compared to last year. Violent crime is down 25%. Property crime is down 23%. Burglaries are down 49%, and theft from autos are down 43%.
Okay. Last figure I kind of heard was what, overall 33, I think it was?
Yeah, it's because the numbers are so small.
Right,
If you have,
right.
we had a slight, when you look at April 18 versus April 17, we had a 13 incident increase. We had 86 versus 73.
Gotcha.
So instead of 30, it's now 20-something.
Okay.
But the numbers,
Yeah.
look good so far.
Yeah, I'm holding my breath. Had you thought about, and Ms. Green over here, advertising on the buses?
If I had a budget for it.
You got tag board?
Yeah, I was just talking to Lieutenant Kraus in the hallway before we came down, and I want to put big panels up on our fence outside of the police department that say that we're hiring and what our core values are and things like that. Yeah, it's a matter of having a budget. We don't have a line item budget for recruitment.
You all want to start a little band yourself?
I can play cowbell.
I kind of like the idea of just transferring part of your budget to the Department of Transportation here, and, let's just do it.
Or you would think the Department of Transportation would do it gratis.
I'm sure they'll give you a good price.
Other jurisdictions, I'm assuming, have kind of the same issue going on. What are they doing? Smaller jurisdictions.
I mean, you go to Baltimore and they've been to Puerto Rico. And they're
I
hiring.
saw that.
Yeah. And they did it back in the day, I want to say probably 10 years ago, when I went to the polar bear plunge. They had 2 classes, and most of the people in this class were from Puerto Rico. I mean, you just, everybody's shaking the bushes.
I know a lot of nurses come from the Philippines. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
So, and there are articles out there that you go to California and they're increasing their pay 20 to 30% just because of the competition.
They apparently allowed a number of their recruits from Puerto Rico go back home to help out with the power outage and, various manpower issues that caused.
Right.
And I remember seeing that on either the 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock news. I think they were welcoming them back, and looked like a pretty good deal to me. But
Right. So hopefully the city will pay for me to travel to St. Thomas, St. John's, and St. Croix to do some, no, I'm just kidding, to do some recruitment.
One thing I want to mention, I did see speaking of the news, on Channel 11 last week, Commissioner D'Souza in Baltimore City, they're starting a structured courses for officer friendly. I mean, it sounds like you go through a series of classes. It's just not you're an officer friendly. It sounded like a really structured program. I was going to get Mr. Toller to take a look at it and do some research. I don't know if that's something we might want to do. And I guess you get a certification at the end of whatever couple of weeks or several weeks you go through the program. But I thought, if kind of that's the focus and you learn how to do that, to me, that makes it, I think, better. But like I said, I'm going to have him take a look at that. I mean, I didn't know if you all were familiar with it, heard about it.
I have not.
Okay, I think it was just last week. They talked about it on the news. Okay, and he was talking about it, so, okay. All right.
nothing. 4 minutes left in the first period. Just thought I'd let you know.
All right.
Thank you all so
Blue
very
light's
much.
going home.
Lieutenant Kraus, thank you for coming. All right. Chief, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
I move that we adjourn.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It is now